I'm here today with Kaz and Amy Kato. Kaz and Amy are living in Tokyo, and they are serving the Lord in Tokyo. Kaz and Amy, welcome to Allentown. It's good to have you in our FIM office today.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You guys are such special friends. Kim and I have had the privilege of visiting you several times in Tokyo, and I've got to tell you, you are wonderful hosts. We've really enjoyed the time that we've had there. Tell us a little bit about the church that where you pastor and the work that's going on, that, you know, what that church is about, what you're doing on a day-by-day basis.
What we do is try to establish a healthy church in Tokyo. And what we do is we have established a church community in the neighborhood area of Tokyo, not like the really crowded business district, but where people actually establish their families so that we could have church community that is local, something that is not a special interest group church, but church community that is formed by regular people living in Tokyo. And one of the unique things that we do is we don't necessarily cater to the international crowd in Tokyo. We do everything in our service in Japanese, hoping to see people who never left Japan being introduced to Jesus in their own cultural context, in their own language. And so far, God's been blessing the ministry.
That's really amazing. Amy, last time we were there, we noticed the number of young families, young children. That's pretty unusual at a church in Japan, isn't it?
Yes, it's very unusual, but we're very happy that the Lord has blessed us with so many young mothers and young couples that,
And you're doing Bible studies with them in addition to church time, whether it be when they're available. So tell me, when do you have time? The folks in Tokyo is an urban environment, obviously, a very, very busy city, very work-focused area. So a lot of the folks are working late. When do you have time to do Bible studies and discipleship? When does that take place, Amy?
it's funny because some of our Bible studies don't even start until about 9 o'clock at night. By the time that people finish their work schedules and are able to meet up, it's usually between 8 and 9. So it's not the typical American style, but you do what you can.
So these folks are working all day. They're coming when they do a Bible study. They come. That's quite a commitment, a sacrifice for them to do that. And I'm sure they're really motivated and committed to do that.
Yes.
Kazu, what is different about church planting in Tokyo? How does that look? Because you've lived both in Japan, you've lived in the U.S., so you've had both experiences. Your theological background is strong here in Bible colleges and seminary and things of that nature. What makes church planting in Tokyo different than perhaps we would look at it here in the U.S.?
Well, one of the things when I was in seminary, what one of the professors said was, if you really want to establish a big church, you got to start with acquiring the land big enough that you can have a huge parking lot. In Tokyo, that's one of the things that we don't have land. So we really don't start from the building or the size of the parking lot. We really start from trying to get rid of all those external things and see, okay, well, how do we establish a group of people that Jesus talks about? So what it looks like is not as glamorous as people may think, because it's not necessarily a project that we're trying to do. It is, well, let me just say it this way. Oftentimes when people talk about missions, at least in my previous experiences in the United States, a lot of church planters will use terminologies such as like strategy or target. Those words to me are very strong militaristic terminologies, where you have a mission and you have to do whatever it takes to get the mission done. But when I actually look at the Bible and when I see how people how they plant churches, they use words like sowing and watering, very agricultural terminologies where it takes time and commitment to a certain land, a certain environment, certain people. So what our church plant looks like is it's very less program or building driven. It's very people driven. It takes time. We don't look for immediate results. We measure the success of our ministry not by how much we read, but how much we sow on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. In Tokyo, you don't use the word church, you use the word community. How has that changed perhaps the perception of some that you are reaching and the people that you're building relationships with?
One of the things that we even teach our people in the church is that church is not a building. Our church community is intentionally not program or people or expertise driven. So what we want, what we want as the main attraction for our community is the family of God. Basically, we remind our people that coming to this service on Sunday and giving offerings and singing and listening to someone teach the Bible, that is not the church. Those are some of the foundational structures of the community, but the church itself is a group of called out people who recognize Jesus to be the promised Christ, who is going to bring the kingdom. So it's really about a group of people who believe in the resurrection of Jesus, who believe in the second coming of Him, who is going to restore all things, and we just continue to get together, pray together, encourage one another on those basic facts of who we believe Jesus to be. And so naturally what we do as a church plant is not necessarily doing more programs, but really encouraging one another to embrace the type of vision that the Bible depicts if Jesus is truly the Christ.
There's two things about your fellowship, your church in Tokyo that are fairly unique for Tokyo. The Christian population in Tokyo, in Japan, is generally very old. Most pastors are what we would say would be senior citizens here in the U.S., right? So your church is young. Your church community is also growing.
Sure.
Both of those are fairly, it's the exception rather than the rule in Tokyo. What factors do you believe have contributed to that? Obviously, we understand theologically it's all God's work, it's all for God's glory, but there's something that's happening there. How would you advise or counsel others to consider some of the things that you've learned and God's taught you for their churches as well?
Sure, my answer was going to be the grace of God.
That's understood. Totally.
I think one of the things that we do is we don't necessarily address felt needs of the people during the service. We actually expect people to be doing those things with one another. And what we try to do is we try to teach the Bible. One of the unique things is we don't have dynamic worship music team. We intentionally scale things down so that people can focus on the words of what we're singing. We believe in emotions, but we believe emotions to be a healthy byproduct of right thinking. So some of the things that we do is we constantly contrast the Japanese worldview and the biblical worldview and try to encourage faith in people to embrace what may feel unnatural to them, but something that is deeply rooted in the scriptures. So we spend about 45 minutes or sometimes even, close to an hour studying God's Word every Sunday. And I try not to bore them as much as possible. But again, they really don't have a lot of time to engage with the scriptures during the weekdays. So again, I think the reason a lot of younger people are growing and living out their faith is because they are given a strong foundation, not just these spiritual band-aids, that
Right.
Allow them to feel comforted just for a moment, but without providing a strong foundation.
Well, that's so vital, not only in Tokyo, not only in Japan, but even here in the U.S. One of the focuses that I've been thinking of myself is that as our culture becomes more and more secular, our preaching and our teaching needs to be more and more apologetic. People have less of a foundation of Christian ideas in their mind, and of course zero of that in Japan because it's not at all a Christian culture in any way. Amy, you've listened to Kaz preach in Japanese and in English. You're able to understand all of that in Japanese. Your Japanese has really gotten quite good.
Well, I would say I might understand about 60 to 70%, so I can still learn some more, but yeah.
Well, that's great. So you're still learning, but you're getting around, you're communicating and building relationships with Japanese friends exclusively in their language,
Yes.
which is pretty awesome. Kaz and Amy, you're just greatly appreciated. Your work is greatly appreciated. There are many things that you're doing there in your church ministry in Tokyo that are transferable here to the U.S. And some of the things that you've shared are they work not just because they work in Tokyo, they work because they're biblical. And I know that you're discovering that, and so we're very excited about that work that God's doing.